Stop scrolling. February 25th and 26th are not normal days, and if you stay silent during this Gemini moon, you could miss a conversation that changes everything. On February 25th and 26th, when the first quarter moon rises in Gemini, don't ignore it, don't scroll past it, and definitely don't treat it like just another ordinary day. This is not the time to stay silent about what's been weighing on your mind. This is not the time to avoid the conversation you know needs to happen, and this is absolutely not the time to pretend you don't have something important to say. The first quarter moon is always a moment of tension, a turning point between intention and action. It's the phase where the universe asks, are you going to move forward or are you going to stay comfortable? And when that moon is in Gemini, the sign of communication, curiosity, truth, and connection, that tension shows up through words, through texts, through phone calls, through unexpected messages, through conversations you didn't plan but somehow can't avoid. Gemini energy doesn't whisper, it activates the mind. It speeds up thoughts, it brings information to the surface. You may find yourself replaying old conversations, thinking about what you should have said, what you wish someone had said, or what still remains unresolved. This lunar phase creates mental momentum. It pushes you to speak, to ask, to clarify, to respond. If there's been confusion in a relationship, expect it to surface. If there's been something unsaid between you and someone else, this is when it starts knocking loudly at the door. And what you should not do during these 2 days is suppress it. Don't ghost someone to avoid discomfort. Don't lie to keep the peace. Don't overthink yourself into silence. Because the first quarter moon demands action, and in Gemini, action comes through communication. You might feel restless. You might feel pulled in two directions. Part of you may want to keep things light and casual, while another part of you craves depth and clarity. That's the Gemini duality at work. But here's the truth. This phase isn't about superficial chatter. It's about meaningful dialogue disguised as everyday interaction. A random check-in could turn into a heart-to-heart. A simple question could reveal a hidden truth. A playful exchange could open the door to something much deeper. Energy like this creates crossroads. Words become choices. Conversations become catalysts. If you've been waiting for a sign to speak up about your feelings, this is it. If you've been unsure whether to ask for clarity, this is it. If you've been holding back an idea, a confession, or even a boundary, this is the moment where holding it in feels heavier than letting it out. Gemini rules the throat, the voice, the exchange of information, and the first quarter moon creates friction that demands release. So if you try to avoid the conversation, it may show up anyway. Through someone confronting you, through a sudden realization, through news that forces you to respond. There is also something fated about conversations under this moon. Not dramatic in a chaotic way, but significant. Words spoken now have ripple effects. Decisions made after a discussion now can shift the direction of a connection. You may realize that someone has been thinking about you just as much as you've been thinking about them. You may discover information that changes your perspective entirely. You may finally say something that sets you free. So don't numb yourself with distractions. Don't bury your thoughts under busy work. Don't convince yourself that it's not the right time. The right time is when the pressure builds. And during the first quarter moon in Gemini, the pressure builds through communication. Lean into it. Be honest. Even if your voice shakes, ask the question. Send the message. Have the conversation. Because these 2 days are not random. They are a pivot point. And what you say, or choose not to say, could define the next chapter in ways you don't yet see. And as this energy continues to build, you may start noticing subtle signs that something is shifting beneath the surface. Conversations may feel charged, not necessarily in a dramatic way, but in a way that feels meaningful. There's an alertness in the air. People are listening more closely. You are listening more closely. Words carry weight now. Even silence carries a message. If someone pauses before responding, you'll feel it. If someone chooses their words carefully, you'll notice. The first quarter moon in Gemini heightens awareness of tone, timing, and subtext. It's not just about what is said, it's about what is meant. You might also feel an internal dialogue getting louder. Gemini energy doesn't just rule external conversations, it rules the conversation you have with yourself. And during this phase, that inner voice becomes impossible to ignore. If you've been doubting yourself, you'll be asked to challenge that narrative. If you've been telling yourself a story that keeps you small, this is where you rewrite it. The tension of the first quarter moon pushes you to confront the gap between what you think and what you know, between what you assume and what is actually true. And sometimes the most important conversation you'll have on these days is the one where you decide to stop second-guessing your own instincts. There can also be surprising reconnections. Gemini governs short-distance travel, messages, siblings, old acquaintances, people who drift in and out. Don't be shocked if someone from your past reaches out unexpectedly. Don't be surprised if you feel the urge to reconnect with someone you haven't spoken to in a while. This energy opens communication channels that may have felt closed. But here's the key. Respond with awareness. Not every reopened door is meant to be walked through long-term. Some are simply there to offer closure, clarity, or a lesson you're finally ready to understand. At the same time, be mindful of impulsive words. Gemini moves fast. Thoughts can turn into texts within seconds. The first quarter moon brings urgency, but not everything needs an immediate reaction. There's a difference between speaking your truth and reacting from anxiety. If you feel emotionally charged, take a breath before you respond. Let your words be intentional, not just fast. This is about conscious communication, not chaotic expression. You may also feel pulled toward learning something new, researching, asking deeper questions. Curiosity spikes now. Information is currency under Gemini. Pay attention to what topics keep popping up in your awareness. Pay attention to the conversations that repeat. There's a theme developing, and it's guiding you somewhere. The friction of this moon is not random. It's pointing to where growth is required. It's showing you where clarity is overdue. And here's something powerful. Decisions made during this phase tend to stick, because they're not made lightly. They're made after mental tension reaches a tipping point. When you finally speak up, it's because you can't hold it in anymore. When you finally ask the question, it's because uncertainty has become heavier than the answer. That's why these conversations matter. They're not casual, they're catalytic. By the time the energy begins to settle after the 26th, you may feel lighter, not because everything is perfectly resolved, but because something has moved. Something that was stagnant is now in motion. Something that was unclear now has shape. And even if the conversation didn't go exactly how you imagined, you'll know you honored your voice. You'll know you chose participation over avoidance. So as these days unfold, stay present, stay curious, stay open. Let yourself engage, let yourself speak, let yourself listen. The first quarter moon in Gemini isn't here to create chaos. It's here to create clarity through connection. And the words exchanged now could echo far beyond these 2 days, shaping relationships, opportunities, and decisions in ways you'll only fully understand later. As this lunar tension reaches its peak, there is a moment where everything feels suspended between thought and action. You can sense it, a choice hovering in the air, a message drafted but not yet sent, a truth sitting at the edge of your tongue. This is where the first quarter moon in Gemini does its real work. It doesn't force outcomes, it forces awareness. It makes you realize that silence is also a decision, avoidance is also a response, and clarity rarely arrives without participation. You may notice how quickly information travels during these days. News spreads, secrets surface, misunderstandings unravel, or, in some cases, deepen if they aren't addressed directly. Gemini energy thrives on exchange, but it also exposes inconsistencies. If something doesn't add up, you'll feel it. If someone's words and actions don't align, it becomes obvious. This is not about paranoia. It's about perception sharpening. The mind is alert now. Patterns become visible. And once you see a pattern clearly, you can't unsee it. There's also a crossroads quality to this energy, a sense that a conversation could tip the scale in one direction or another. Relationships can shift from casual to serious, from unclear to defined, from distant to reconnected, or from lingering to complete. It all depends on what is said and how honestly it's expressed. Gemini teaches that communication is power, but only when it's authentic. Half-truths create more tension. Mixed signals create more confusion. But directness, even when uncomfortable, creates movement. You might also feel called to express something creative. Gemini isn't only about serious talks, it's about expression in all forms. Writing, speaking, sharing ideas, recording your thoughts, brainstorming with someone who stimulates your mind. If you've been sitting on an idea, this is when it wants air. The friction of the first quarter moon can feel like mental pressure building until you release it through words. And once you do, inspiration flows more freely. At the same time, pay attention to how you listen, not just how you speak. Are you hearing to understand or hearing to respond? Gemini can move so fast that conversations turn into debates without intention. Slow down enough to truly absorb what someone is saying. Sometimes the breakthrough isn't in what you declare, but in what you finally understand. And here's the deeper layer. This moon is activating your relationship with truth, not just factual truth, but emotional truth. What have you been pretending doesn't matter? What have you been downplaying? What have you been intellectualizing instead of feeling? Gemini loves logic, but the first quarter moon introduces emotional friction. It asks you to bridge the gap between head and heart, to let your thoughts and your feelings meet in the same sentence. By the end of these 2 days, something clicks. A realization settles in. You understand where you stand, you understand where someone else stands. The fog lifts just enough for you to see the road ahead. And even if that road requires courage, you won't feel as uncertain as before, because uncertainty feeds on silence, clarity feeds on conversation. So don't disappear, don't shrink your voice, don't convince yourself that it's better to wait. The momentum is here now, the invitation is here now. Lean into the dialogue unfolding around you and within you. Trust that the right words will come when you allow yourself to speak from a grounded place. And remember, this first quarter moon in Gemini isn't random energy passing through. It's a turning point in disguise, a mental awakening, a conversational catalyst. And what begins with a single sentence during these days could echo into decisions that shape the months ahead. And as the energy begins to stretch into the late hours of the 26th, there is a subtle but undeniable shift that takes place. It's the feeling of having crossed an invisible line. Before this moon, there was hesitation. There were questions circling without landing. There was that constant mental replay of what if and maybe later. But once the conversation happens, once the truth is spoken, once the question is asked, once the response is received, you are no longer in the same position you were before. Even if nothing dramatic appears to change on the outside, something has changed within you. You start to realize that your voice is a compass, that every time you silence yourself, you drift further from clarity. And every time you express yourself honestly, even imperfectly, you realign with your own direction. This is the deeper lesson of the first quarter moon in Gemini. It's not just about talking, it's about choosing alignment over avoidance. It's about recognizing that communication is not a disruption to peace, it's the pathway to authentic peace. During these days, some conversations may feel light and quick, filled with laughter, ideas, and rapid exchanges that spark excitement. Others may feel slow and deliberate, where every word seems measured and meaningful. Both types matter. Gemini teaches versatility. Not every truth has to be heavy. Not every breakthrough has to come with tears. Sometimes clarity arrives through a simple realization mid-sentence. Sometimes closure arrives in a calm tone rather than a dramatic finale. There is also a powerful mirror effect under this moon. The way people respond to you reflects something important. If someone meets your honesty with openness, you learn who is capable of meeting you where you stand. If someone deflects, avoids, or distorts, you gain information just as valuable. This is data. Gemini gathers data, and the first quarter moon asks you to use it, to observe patterns without denial, to adjust your direction accordingly. You may also notice that your priorities begin to reorganize themselves. Once certain conversations happen, certain options no longer feel aligned. You outgrow the gray area, you crave straightforwardness, you become less tolerant of mixed signals and more attracted to clarity, and that shift is quiet but powerful. It changes how you move forward. As the lunar tension begins to ease, you might feel mentally tired but emotionally lighter. That's because you've processed something. You've engaged instead of escaping. You've participated in shaping your reality rather than waiting for it to shape you. And that participation builds confidence. It reminds you that you are not powerless in your connections. You are an active voice within them. The most important thing to understand is that this first quarter moon in Gemini is not just about these 2 days. It's about momentum. What begins as a conversation now becomes a storyline that unfolds over the coming weeks. Seeds planted through dialogue begin to grow. Agreements made now begin to solidify. Realizations uncovered now begin to guide decisions later. So as this phase closes, take a breath and acknowledge your courage. Whether you spoke boldly or gently, whether the conversation was long overdue or completely unexpected, you showed up. And that matters. Because under this moon, showing up with your voice is the breakthrough. This is the turning point where thoughts become direction, where questions become answers, where silence becomes expression. And once you step into that expression, you don't go back to who you were before. When the mind and the heart finally meet in the same sentence, everything changes.